are now listening to the House by the Video Store podcast.
There's no more room in hell. The dead will walk near.
We have such sights to show you.
I kick ass for the Lord!
Praise God!
Keep away! The flower's mine!
Welcome to the second episode of the House by the Video Store podcast. I'm your host, William, and joining me today will be...
Sean, also with the site.
My name's Derek, and I'm new to the site.
So Derek is actually my brother, who hasn't written any articles for us or been in videos, but he's wanted to be. And since he's also watched a lot of horror movies and has a lot of similar interests, thought it'd be someone good to bring on the podcast. And Corey couldn't make it today. And me and him, growing up, watched a lot of horror movies together, so it kind of just made sense to bring him on to talk about some of these movies. So today, the podcast, we're going to go through a little bit of news and then get into a discussion of the first four movies in the Friday the 13th franchise. So in terms of news for the site, we had a recent video release that got some pretty good response. So Sean, I'll let you talk about that real quick.
Yeah, I put together the video that came out last Friday, which was around the 21st, I think. It was Evil Dead techniques and references and Drag Me to Hell. And basically just compared, it was probably, about 10 or so references or kind of callbacks to the original Evil Dead, of course, directed by Sam Raimi. Evil Dead 2, and Army of Darkness, that he put in the 2009 Drag Me to Hell, which includes, kind of some horror gags, some stuff he kind of repeated, and also some direct callbacks. That got picked up by a couple of bigger sites, Bloody Disgusting and Joe Blow. So that gave us a good amount of views. I think we're over 5,000 right about now. And also some new subscribers. So if you're new to the site, welcome. Stick around because this podcast is just starting. This is the second episode, so we're still figuring things out. But yeah, that's the big content we had on the site last week.
Yeah, and it's a good video, just if you haven't watched Drag Me to Hell in a while, because you realize how many things were callbacks to the Evil Dead series, and how many techniques Sam Raimi uses in pretty much everything he makes. I think something we could do that'd be funny to do in the future would be to explain how Oz the Great and the Powerful is essentially a remake of Army of Darkness.
Yeah, I had not seen that yet, and I wanted to just because I'm a fan of Raimi, but when you explained to me the other day the plot is pretty much Army of Darkness, I went back and looked at some kind of a Wikipedia summary of the plot, and it makes me want to watch it now.
I got another question, though. Did they have any of the Three Stooges influence in the Oz, the Great and Powerful, as like he did in all of his other movies?
I think it was much more subdued. There was still some humor in it, and Bruce Campbell had a small cameo. But it wasn't as bad as Spider-Man 3, but it wasn't as good as Spider-Man 2, so it's just and it was better than the Tim Burton Alice in Wonderland movie.
Yeah, that's hard to watch. It's
worth watching if it's on HBO or you see it somewhere if it's on Netflix. I wouldn't necessarily go my way to watch it, though.
Yeah, I missed it in theaters and then just haven't really had the chance yet, but I do want to check it out eventually. But I'm kind of glad the Spider-Man movies, kind of faded out for him. Spider-Man 3, I wish Spider-Man 3 would have went better, but because of all that, we're getting the Evil Dead TV series. I just wish he was directing every episode. That's the only thing I'm kind of worried about, which I'm sure it'll be serviceable, but I just love him as a director. His style, he has so much of his personality and stamp into everything he does.
Yeah, hopefully, he's directing, I believe, the pilot and maybe one or two of the first episodes. Then he'll just be kind of the producer for the rest of the series that hopefully is just driving the creative direction.
Mm-hmm. Let's hope that pilot episode's like 2 hours long.
Yeah.
That would be great. Just the 2 hour, it's pretty much all self-contained that kind of leads into the series. That would be the dream scenario for that.
Yep, one can hope.
Yep.
See, other quick site news, the video this week we get coming out, I'm doing a video breakdown of The X-Files Home, one of the more notorious episodes of that series. So I just kind of went and took a look at that. what happens in it, some of the themes and symbolism in it. So you can look for that coming out this week.
Yeah, you've had a few of those. How many X-Files breakdowns have you done so far? Which some of those got pulled from YouTube. You want to kind of explain how that happened? Or what happened, the reason behind the 30-second recaps? Because originally they were much longer, which we still have some of those up on Vimeo, right?
Yeah, so I had started thinking that would be like a video series to do. So the first one I did, tried to submit it to YouTube, it got blocked. Just because Fox content gets blocked worldwide if it gets flagged. So we put it on Vimeo, and even though it got a few hits driven to the site, the video itself really didn't get many views, just because Vimeo's not good for surfacing content for people to find it. Then I made one more and decided, what's the point of doing these videos if nobody's watching them? So with Twitter releasing their video function, I remade some of them into 30-second videos and put those on YouTube, and it actually let me put them there. So I did a few of them. And then, so on YouTube, I believe there's 3 currently out there, 30-second videos. This one's going to be longer, and I think I figured out a way to get it where I can post it and not get it taken down. So we will see, but hopefully it gets to stay up there and everybody can see it.
Yeah, it's a shame. There's they're kind of on lockdown so hard on Fox content, especially for stuff like that. Fans want to see it. It's just a shame.
Well, and then you see videos that people posted like 8 years ago that are essentially the entire episode, and they haven't got pulled down just because they haven't indexed all the old content yet. So it's very frustrating just to see, like, you made this video that's very transformative, meets fair use, but if you dispute it and you go back and forth, you never win. So
yeah, well, I mean, that's another thing. It was kind of smart to do those for Twitter, the 30-second things, because it seems like people have liked those.
Yeah.
And we've been trying to do a lot of stuff like that for the site. Just kind of, I mean, we started out being video focused. We definitely have some written content on the site, some written news, trailers, and stuff like that we didn't produce on our own. But we're trying to do a lot of different things with video and kind of service content in many different ways. So
yeah,
some stuff you may not be on the site, maybe on Twitter. Most of it all is on the site, but
Yeah, we're just trying to, in some ways, too, just tailor the content to different audiences, see how it works. And it also helps that Twitter and Facebook don't give a shit about copyright, so you can just post whatever you want.
All right. Any other site news or anything else you want to go over real quick?
I think that's it. So we're going to jump into our discussion of the first 4 films in the Friday the 13th franchise, starting now.
Friday the 13th.
So starting the conversation off, we're going to be looking at the first Friday the 13th, which is the one that started the entire franchise, but when people think of the Friday the 13th series, they don't necessarily think about this movie because the killer is not Jason and doesn't have a lot of the trademark things that would become the series in later movies. And it was even a big plot point in the opening sequence of the original Scream. The killer, when he's going after Drew Barrymore, has her boyfriend tied up outside and says that she has to answer a question or he'll kill the boyfriend. And the question is, who was the killer on Friday the 13th? She says Jason. And he says, no, it was Mrs. Voorhees. So it kind of made fun of the fact that a lot of people don't even recognize that first movie was not Jason in it at all.
Yeah, it's another interesting fact about that, the Scream thing is, of course, Wes Craven did Scream, and Sean S. Cunningham, who created Friday the 13th, he worked on Last House on the Left with Wes Craven before this film. So it's kind of, I guess, callback to, since they're buddies, obviously it's a huge franchise anyway that probably would have been mentioned otherwise, but interesting connection between those two.
And I was looking at some of the other information on this movie. Something that's kind of interesting is if you adjust all the numbers for inflation for what this movie made, if you adjust it to current day dollars, it made about $114 million in the U.S., and if you adjust the budget, which was originally $500,000 to modern day dollars, it's about a $4.5 million budget. So if that movie came out today, it would have been a huge hit. And
wow.
That's not even really comparing the different like the amount of screens that it debuted on was much, much lower than it would be today. So that was just a massive, massive hit that came a few years after Halloween, which was a massive hit. Just kind of helped to bring horror to the forefront of TV and movie audiences and get people into it.
Yeah, and the director Sean Cunningham, his reason for making this film was because of Halloween's success. You know, he just thought, hey, we can emulate that and make some money along the way. He's been pretty open about it and worked out really well for him, even though the franchise isn't, you know, regarded as being high art or anything like that. But you know, money-wise and just the pop culture influence that it's had has just been just massive. It's the biggest. It's kind of the granddaddy of the horror genre as far as slashers go.
Yeah, and the just the general story in this one, it does a flashback to a couple of camp counselors being killed in, I believe it's in the late 50s. And then it cuts to current day where there's the girl that's hitchhiking. And of course there's the crazy guy. I believe his name is Crazy Randy. I may be wrong. No, it's
Crazy Ralph.
Crazy Ralph, yes. Yeah. Something with an R.
And the funny thing is, though, the girl Annie that starts off the movie doesn't actually turn out to be the main protagonist. Which is kind of weird, because you would think that her being the first person you really see, that she would actually be the main character. And she actually has the first death, I'm pretty sure, too.
Well, after the flashback, I believe, 50s. To the 50s. Yeah. So she's the first.
Yeah. She's the first current day. Yeah.
And
the first counselor.
After she jumps her ass out of the Jeep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then,
which is a kind of, he mentioned that he ripped that off Hitchcock as far as killing off the supposed, you know, lead protagonist, or what audiences thought would be the lead actress in the film, pretty early on, to kind of throw a twist at them. Well, that way they knew everything was, you know, out the window. Anybody could die.
Yeah, and the funny thing, though, is that when she gets in the Jeep, when she's hitchhiking, you almost think that it's the guy that runs the camp, because he has the same Jeep. So when I first watched it, I was like, oh, okay, so they're probably just playing a joke on her, and then as it goes on, and she ultimately gets her throat slashed, like, oh, well, different person.
Not a joke.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I read that they basically just used the same Jeep and put the top up or something like that.
Yeah, that was the only difference. Was the top.
Yeah, I think it was just the Jeep with the top up and down, and they figured people wouldn't notice.
Yeah, that definitely stood out to me too, because I looked that up because I was curious as well.
Yeah, the inattention to detail in horror movies throughout this series becomes pretty well known, just to the story.
Yes, yeah.
But then the camp, they're renovating it. And it's the camp that's next to what was Camp Crystal Lake. Or no, wait a minute, isn't it Crystal Lake? They just rebranded it? Yeah,
it was Crystal Lake, and they rebranded it to Camp Christie after the guy that owns it.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, I mean, why they have to reopen a camp after people got killed there? I mean, there's plenty of other places you can go.
Yeah, you had a kid drown in the lake a year, and then a year later you have 2 people get slaughtered, so it's not really the best.
It's cheap real estate, I'm sure. That's probably a big reason. You know, just get a couple college-age students.
And it's pre-internet, so the only one to tell everyone that happened is Crazy Ralph, who does. See, I'm already having these movies blur together, 1 and 2, because I've watched all these in the past week. But
well, you know, the second one's almost just a remake of the first one, but the main character, they just changed out the killer. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then in the first one, since, you know, it's kind of low budget, but there's a lot of the movie that gives off the vibe of being a documentary style, because it does a lot of perspective shots from people. Like the scene where the girl at the beginning gets picked up in the Jeep, it almost seems like Jeep Wrangler Confessionals or something. Where
yeah,
like I kept thinking she's going to lean over for a kiss or something, but it didn't quite go that direction.
Yeah, and that was kind of a good and cheap way to present the film, because it lent some realism to it as far as you know, the way it was presented. So it felt more intimate like that, you know, like it is a documentary, even though it's not presented as one, just the way that it was shot and directed, which Sean Cunningham worked on some adult film documentaries, I guess if you want to call them that, before this.
And that influence will be felt throughout the rest of the series, much more so in later installments than this one.
Yeah. Yeah, the adult film aspect of it.
Yeah. And just kind of like the cast, this movie has future megastar Kevin Bacon in a relatively small role. And he meets his untimely end. Was it an arrow through the neck?
An arrow through the neck.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Kevin Bacon. And Ari Lehman, is that how you say his name? Was first Jason, which he's pretty proud of to this day. I think that's his band's name too. Is First Jason.
Yeah, celebrity bands.
He's always running around horror cons. Seems like a nice guy though.
Yeah, so the kills in this movie, a lot of them are more off-screen, where it's just you see the setup and the result, but not it actually occurring, which I'd assume is partially due to budgetary constraints. And also, this came out in the 80s, so a lot of this stuff hadn't really been done on screen before. But one thing that they did show on screen was freaking murdering a snake, where they cut it into 3 pieces.
Yeah, it's kind of weird that was like... It was whatever. It was fine. Yet the actual fictional violence was kind of criticized.
Yeah, because when
Go
ahead.
One of the actual good kills in the movie was the character Marcy. After she had sex with Kevin Bacon's character, she goes into the bathroom and she's thinking that he's in there. Then she gets an axe to the face. So that was one of the few like on-screen kills that was actually pretty good compared to the rest of the movie.
Yeah, and I think we should definitely make sure to note that Tom Savini was doing the special effects for this movie.
Yes, yeah.
The special effects master who's been involved in tons of stuff and even been on screen in some of the Robert Rodriguez movies and From Dusk Till Dawn and
Dawn of the Dead also as a biker.
Yeah, and he was wasn't he also in Planet Terror?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was like a sheriff, I believe, or I think they were sheriffs.
Yeah, he's been in a ton of stuff, but so the kills in this one,
and also directed the awesome Night of the Living Dead remake, which was very good.
Yeah. Like I said, the kills in this one was more imagination and inventiveness and what you thought happened. And this was the one where too they had like the white flashes.
Yeah, which they carried on for a while. I think it really dates the film when they do that.
Yeah, it doesn't seem very convincing or frightening when it goes from somebody's got a knife to their neck and then you see fade to white.
Yeah, freeze frame, fade to white. It definitely kills some of the impact of, and two, it's being 2015, it's how many years have we watched fictional violence on screen just play out in front of us, and it's often a contest of who can go over, be over the top and who can provide the goriest kills. So the white flashes are very tame in comparison, as far as this modern age.
Yeah, and I think part of the interesting part about this movie was before the movie was even made, the director just wanted to use the name Friday the 13th to make a horror movie. So he hired an ad agency to take out an ad just to put it out there and advertise it's the scariest movie ever made. And I think partially he did that too just to test if people would sue him over the copyright, because there had been some other movie that had Friday the 13th with some subtitle.
Yeah, that was a horror film as well, I believe.
I think it's like The Last Orphan or something. Or
something about an orphan, yeah. Which I really don't hear much from him. Corey's probably seen it, I'm sure, but never watched it.
Yeah, so the movie was billed as one of the most frightening movies of all time. And at the end, the main character Alice is brought into the fact that everyone's being murdered. There's like bodies hanging on trees that like flop down her face and stuff. Things that don't make a lot of sense to take the time to string the bodies up that way, especially when you find out who the killer is. Like, I mean, I would struggle to throw like a 130-pound person up into a tree. I'm not a 60-year-old lady.
Yeah, and we should say there's going to be spoilers for these films, so sorry if you haven't seen them.
Spoilers as much as there can be spoilers for these movies.
Yeah.
But I really enjoy when Pamela Voorhees does show up, because when she first shows up, you're not too sure she's nice or what her intentions are, but the first thing she wants to go do is look at the dead bodies.
Yeah.
And she's like, "Oh, I'm not afraid of anything. Let me see the dead bodies." And she sees a couple, makes a comment, and then it turns out, she reveals who she is, and Jason's her son, and all that. But I just love like the main character fighting her off, because there's like 3 different times where she knocks her out and like leaves the room. But I think the most memorable one to me is she gets chased into the counselor's office and finds a shotgun but can't get the ammo for it. So she's kind of cunt punts her with the butt of the barrel and knocks her out. And she's like, and then she just gets up and runs off. And she ends up in a sugar pantry, and she comes in waving the machete, and she just happens to grab a frying pan and knocks her out again. And then just leaves her unconscious on the floor and leaves the room again. And there's just multiple times that movie could have probably ended, but their character always fled as soon as she knocked her unconscious.
Well, I mean, those characters that time hadn't seen horror movies, so they didn't know what you're supposed to do, that you should just kill whenever the person's out, take them out.
Yeah.
Then there's the very slow-mo scene at the end where Mrs. Voorhees gets her head chopped off.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a good payoff, considering the rest of the film is pretty tame, and also too, there's actually a struggle because so many of the kills are, like we said, off screen or so quick. And that was another thing about the first couple movies, is when that happens, there's just no suspense behind it. There's no struggle, it's like you're not seeing the characters just all of a sudden are dead like that. So the end of that movie I liked a whole lot, actually.
Yeah, because a lot of the kills, like you said, there's not a lot of tension to them. It's just like, person is in room, person doesn't see what's in the room, they're dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's not until we'll get into the later movies when we get there. So after the famous beheading scene, the next most iconic scene from the movie is when Alice is in the boat and gets pulled into the lake by Jason, the decaying body of dead Jason. And it's still ambiguous as to whether or not that actually happened or if she was just imagining it, which didn't really matter because it all got retconned in the following movies anyway. But
yeah, you can't really take much of this franchise as fact because it doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
the writers don't care about the history. It's just every movie's just kind of services itself.
Yeah, because the intention originally from Cunningham was for this to be an anthology series where it would the movies would all just be connected by the fact that they occurred on Friday the 13th. Kind of like what John Carpenter wanted to do with the Halloween series when after Halloween 2 he allowed Season of the Witch to be made. And that didn't really work out for them, and Friday the 13th never even tried it. Just because they liked even back before the Marvel universe and shared universe movies and sequelitis, they still wanted to make sequels to everything. So
yeah, I think part 5, which we won't be talking about in detail, but part 5, I think they were going to see if they could kind of test the waters and go in that direction where Jason isn't actually the killer.
Yeah,
but they quickly backpedaled in 6.
Yeah, they're like, let's just go back to the ones that made more money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is kind of going back to the kills off screen, but the character Brenda that decided to have the strip Monopoly game, I really enjoyed the part where as soon as she gets fully stripped almost, she's like, oh, I need to go to my room now. So kind of cut that short, and then she wanders around, and then she hears the child's voice outside when she gets back to her room asking for help, and she goes out and ends up at the archery range, and all the lights come on, and then you don't see her again until a dead body is thrown through her window.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. That's one thing I love about this series is bodies getting thrown through windows.
Yeah, which goes back to how could a 6-year-old woman throw a dead girl through the window?
I mean, maybe they just got that Voorhees gene where they can just fling stuff.
I wouldn't mind them remaking this first movie, but right off the bat, it's Pamela Voorhees, so you get to see her toss bodies through windows, and, chase people down in the woods. That's the movie I want. That's the remake I want to see. It's like have fun with it. Everybody already knows she's gonna be the killer, and if you're not gonna have Jason in it, you know.
So get Betty White to be Pamela Voorhees. And have her.
Imagine her face on a horror movie poster Friday the 13th.
What they don't show you is off screen. Pamela Voorhees is also an engineer and has a pneumatic catapult that she just loads people on and just throws them everywhere.
Hey, it makes sense. You know, you've got people in trees going through windows, walls.
Yeah. So going from that and segueing into Friday the 13th Part 2. This movie opens with the death of Alice, who survived in the first movie, and the opening scenes of the movie. And I think this is partially because the actors who played the character had been receiving threatening messages and had a stalker as a result of the first movie.
Wow.
So she wanted to get written out of the second one as quickly as possible and have as little to do with it as she could. Which,
Well, and I kind of like that about it. They kind of wipe. They kind of throw it away because they almost just reset and, you know, as you guys mentioned before, do the same thing over again. But it's kind of nice. Like, oh, well, here's the protagonist from the first film that the one that managed to survive, and they wipe him out immediately. But they don't do anything interesting with it, you know?
yeah, and it takes a while to, okay, so now the killer is Jason, right? Just because based on the end of the last movie, Jason was a boy, and now he's a full-grown dude wearing overalls and plaid.
Now, didn't the girl that survived the first one, didn't she find the Jason's mom's head in her refrigerator?
Yes.
And that's the story after she gets killed. I remember that being a
Yeah,
good
because I
scene.
think she opens it, sees the head, and then gets stabbed in her head shortly thereafter.
Yeah, that's right. An ice pick. That's what it was. I'm pretty sure it was an ice pick.
Yeah, so then you get to the new set of people who are going to the camp that is next to the camp that was Camp Crystal Lake. Because in this movie, the old camp of Crystal Lake is actually, I believe, off limits to everyone. They're not supposed to go to it. And they're at the camp that's next to it. Which, once again, why would you do that?
And of course, everybody wants to go check it out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so this one, it continues the trend. So some of the people, some of the camp counselors are still likable compared to the ones that show up in later movies. But there's, some of the stereotypical characters. There is, like, the one super good arm wrestling dude in a wheelchair, which is breaking all the stereotypes.
Well, he's very fast at wheeling that chair.
And that's before Murderball.
Which his death scene's the best one in that movie, probably, and definitely a standout as far as those first 4 films goes.
Yeah, this movie has a couple of iconic scenes. There's one at the very end, and then the wheelchair death. And this one, I think, has more nudity than the first one, if I remember correctly.
Well, this one's the first one to have the skinny dipping scene.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which, like many things, are repeated over and over and over in the series.
Yeah, and this is Baghead Jason, who just has the one eye hole cut out and is stalking his victims. And then there's one point where it appears he may have killed a dog, because there's a little Shih Tzu dog that the girl who wears the half shirts has. And then it walks out in the woods and walks up to the feet of Jason, and then you don't see it for a while. And then later, when some of the characters wander over into Camp Crystal Lake, they see a dead animal carcass that has fur that looks similar to the dog. So you think that that's what happened to it. And it has a shocking return at the end.
Yeah, and I totally forgot about the dog. The end of the movie, it's like, oh yeah, there was a dog there.
Awesome.
I don't know if they expected more out of that, or if I just didn't care about the dog, because it's been a long time since I watched that, and I watched that film recently as well.
It's also too, though, it's like almost an hour gap in between them finding it. So by then, everybody else has been slaughtered to that point. So the dog lived. Well, we also kind of skimmed over the Crazy Ralph character, because I think he only was in the second one for maybe 30 minutes tops. But it's kind of a bad. I mean, it was kind of nice to get him see him killed, but it's also kind of a thing I would have liked to see his character be able to continue for a few more movies.
Yeah, he was probably one of my favorite characters of the first movie, and the second one too. I wish he would have stuck around longer than he did, as far as being in the entire series. And real quick, was Was there a character like him in the remake?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I know Cabin in the Woods there definitely was, which is an awesome twist on that. But
Yeah.
but I don't really remember a Crazy Ralph in the remake. But it's been a long time since I've seen the remake.
Yeah, a lot of horror movies in this day and age don't have the seemingly crazy person that warns everyone they're going to die. You don't see that,
which is cliched. It's cliched, but it's fun, you know.
Yeah. So, and one thing about like these movies, so part 2 and 3 especially, is Jason runs. He chases people. I think one of the more effective sequences in the movie is the main girl, or the last girl, Jenny. When she is running from Jason, she finds his shack, and when she walks in it, through the window, you see Jason running towards the cabin in the background, and then she has to go hide. So I think that's just an interesting aspect to the character, because in later movies, he does more, slow walking or stalking, but in these, he's actually just, he's booking ass trying to run after people.
Yeah.
Well, he was more human in this film, too, because in this one, him and Paul get in a skirmish in the cabin, and Paul's not able to really defeat him, but he's able to at least survive it.
Yeah.
Whereas as it goes on in the franchise, Jason almost becomes superhuman and pretty much just demolishes anybody that he comes in contact with.
Yeah, he just seems like a unstoppable force in the later films where no matter what you do, there's nothing you can stop Jason from doing. But I like that when I was younger, that he was just like this, almost like a mystical creature, But I kind of like the way that he was handled in these early films, as far as being more of a real person that could get hurt. You could have a chance at fighting back, because it led to the tension more. That there was a chance you could fight him off or potentially kill him, which they did do.
Yeah, for a while at least.
Yeah, until they wanted to make more money.
So, some other aspects of this movie. So there's a very seductive game of electronic hockey that they play that leads to a wheelchair dude and his girl getting all gussed up to go have some relations. And she walks around in her underwear for a while.
Let's also remember, though, that is the granny panties, and she walks over and tries to decide which one she's going to wear. Yeah. And by today's standards, they're, very unflattering.
Well, and two, like, if you're camping and you hear a noise outside your cabin and you're putting on different underwear, are you going to go examine and see what the noise is while only wearing those underwear, or take the extra 3 seconds to put on a pair of pants?
Hey, she did put on socks and shoes before she went outside.
Yeah. Or maybe
she hit that part.
Maybe she thought it was her dude coming for her, but he gets the best kill of this movie.
I would say probably maybe the first 3, just because it's another axe to the face, but then he falls down a flight of stairs backwards in his wheelchair.
Yeah, they said they actually used a real person to roll down there. I think because it was raining and everything, they couldn't use a dummy and just so it would look right. So that was kind of a multi-layered kill, because it wasn't just, an axe going through somebody or being stabbed. It was like he gets chopped in the face and then rolls down the stairs backwards, which I think I read that they attached cables to the chair so it would stop it from flipping. And they did it once. They said, oh, that was great, but can you do it faster? So they sped it up, and the stunt guy, they said what he didn't know is it was going to stop so hard at the bottom it would have thrown him out and practically broken his neck. So there was a couple guys in the bushes, and when he comes rolling down the stairs, they just jump out and tackle him. That way he doesn't flip back and break his neck. But again, the white flashes save him, because we never saw this part, because they just freeze frame it and like white flash it. So you just, you think that's all there is to it, but it would have been nice to see a body fly out of that wheelchair at the end.
Well, and it's also a scene, like it's typically when they have like the montage in the next movie of what happened in the prior movie. A lot of times it's only the end scenes, but in part 3 they still show that scene just because it was so cool.
Yeah.
Then towards the end of the movie, so beyond the wheelchair down the stairs, the second most iconic scene is once they put a machete in Jason's shoulder and go back to a different cabin. They're reunited with the dog whose owner died the day before that night, but nobody really cared to look for the dog, apparently. They hear the noise outside the cabin, the dog comes up, and then through the window, Jason comes in, grabs the girl, Jenny, and then she wakes up the next morning.
And he does not have the sack on his face, and it doesn't look that great.
Yeah, the prosthetics weren't that great back in '81 when this came out.
And them slowing it down didn't really help, because you got a good look at him, which was cool, but it lost some of its impact because it wasn't really that terrifying.
Yeah, and there's some ambiguity too about the end of the movie, because when the girl wakes up the next morning and she's asking where the guy Paul is, he's nowhere to be seen. So the implication is kind of that he was killed off screen overnight while she was spared. But going into the beginning of the next movie, once again, it kind of retcons what happened at the end of the prior one. The next movie, the opening, shows Jason just have the machete out of his shoulder and crawling along the floor of the cabin. And the police report they hear at the beginning gives a body count, and based on the numbers, it would not include Paul. So there's some back and forth between the movies as to if he's dead or alive. Not that it matters or they ever revisit it, but...
Yeah, and one other thing about part 2 before we move on is a little bit of exposition that was given in that bar, kind of during the wheelchair romance scene that's going on, was that they kind of alluded to the fact that Jason probably saw his mom get killed at the end of the first movie, and that's why he's out for revenge again, which is kind of a weird thing, considering... Was he living in the woods the entire time? Of course, there's no logic to any of this, and the writers just had to write something to make another film. But there's a lot of leaps of logic, and that's one reason why Tom Savini dropped out for the second film and didn't come back until the fourth one, when he could actually finish him off, or so he thought. Was just because it's just like, if Pamela Voorhees cared about her son so much, and he loved her so much, why would he live in the woods that long?
Yeah.
Alone, and
well, Jason was originally just a plot point, was the MacGuffin for Pamela Voorhees to be a killer, and then they decided to make him the direction of the franchise, so they just had to rewrite it into some way that made sense. Like you said, so the implication is that she thought he died in 1957. He just hung around the woods, I guess eating squirrels or something,
and not growing for about 30 years.
Well, either that was
a weird thing, yeah.
So, I mean, honestly, it's just because they wanted to throw that in on the first one as a shock scare, and then the second one had to follow up on it. So I guess the implication could just be that she was imagining it based on what she heard from Pamela Voorhees that her son died. And in reality, Jason he's been hanging out in the woods for forever and saw his mom get killed and took her head back to his shack. Which... is all somewhat problematic, but in the context of these movies, it's just people getting killed, so... and it's not as bad as some of the story that happens in the later series, but before we go down that rabbit hole, we can get to part 3, which was in 3D at the time, so that's exciting. Yeah,
one of the first big 3D movies of the early 80s, which was... They developed a new technology for it, too. So Steve Miner, he directed the second one, and he returned, I think, because of that, because he could kind of play around with it and have fun with it. And Paramount spent some money on lenses and everything, and kind of spawned a few other 3D movies like Jaws 3D and Amityville Horror 3D, and it paid off for him, I think, in a big way, because it made about a little over $35 million, and it cost $2.5 million to make.
Yeah, so this movie has a lot of scenes. When you're watching it now on a non-3D format, you get a lot of stuff that's being pointed at the camera needlessly. And it's kind of funny, people forget that it wasn't until this movie, about halfway through, that a hockey mask even shows up as the face of Jason. Because before that, it was just, sackhead, and then deformed face.
Sackhead Jason and deformed face Jason.
And this movie too, it has a kind of a cool disco soundtrack, but different elements of this movie. This is definitely the most dated, I would think, rewatching it now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because you have after the beginning, you have the group of teenagers who are going to go in the van with the Cheech and Chong weed smoking people, go on a trip. And there's the annoying guy, Shelley, who's the curly-headed dude with all the jokes and pranks.
Yeah.
Then there's also the motorcycle gang they run into at the store.
Which I love some of these 80s movies because there's always like the chain gang motorcycle ganger. You know, for some reason they're always all over the place and just causing problems. And it's like, I just love that 80s horror movie biker gangs that they always have.
Yeah, and don't forget, Pee-wee's Big Adventure, also a big biker gang, a phenomenal biker gang scene. And I think it's a thing, kind of a Hell's Angels, because that was so huge and in the news and media and everything. It was a thing that scared a lot of people. But I guess by the 80s, it was, it was just another archetype they could throw in there to say, oh, well, a biker gang, they're bad or scary or whatever they want us to do to them.
Yeah, but it's kind of comical now, but their big bullying points, they took the guy's wallet and then gave it back to him.
Well, they almost remind me of like Bulk and Skull from Power Rangers, because they're just kind of bumbling around and they're just kind of not intimidating at all throughout the movie.
Yeah, and then, they even get stared down and made punks by the guy, Shelley, because he runs over their motorcycles.
Yeah, him running over the motorcycles was, genuinely a really funny moment in that film.
And then to get them back, the motorcycle gang siphons the gas out of their cars, which is, oh no.
That's the lamest revenge ever for a biker gang, I think.
And then Jason starts picking people off. There's some cooler kills in this one. I think that the one that I remember most from watching it first is just when the girl gets the harpoon to the face.
Yeah, that was
right after he gets the mask.
Yeah, that was his first hockey mask kill. Also, another one, since it was 3D, is also when he smashes the guy's skull in and the eyeball flies out.
Yeah. Yeah, there's some questionable stuff. Like, it's not really questionable. Like, I'm sure the film was great for the time, and it was probably the perfect weekend popcorn movie to watch with a crowd with, goofy 3D effects, dumb characters, it was, I don't want to say it was like hilarious, but some fun moments, funny scenes and stuff like that. But yeah, now watching those 3D scenes in 2D out of context, I'm sure if anybody saw that, they'd be like, what was the reasoning behind making this snake or go towards the screen or whatever?
Yeah, the most egregious was the beginning of the movie when the guy, like the shopkeeper guy that's eating all the food with the rabbit, gets like a pole to hold up a laundry line and sticks it in the camera.
Yeah.
Like, that was a very high tension situation that needed to be in 3D.
It kind of eased the audience into it to know what to expect, I guess, Yeah.
And then this movie too, there's more of Jason running around, and this one he's almost a little playful at points, because there's the scene where he's in the barn attacking the girl. I believe it's Chris is the girl. And
Which he hangs out in the barn a lot in this film, doesn't he? He kind of stays in there, right?
Yeah. There's the part where the girl like knocks him out and then puts the rope on him and hangs him, where he's hanging on the rope outside the barn. And of course, to get out of the barn, she has to open the door and go past him. And when she opens the door, he's not dead, and he grabs the rope and pulls himself up a little bit and pulls the mask up and smiles at her with his deformed face. It looks completely different than it did in the past movie. And then he, cuts himself down and then comes after her. So he's at least having fun now.
And that's when the audience has fun, when they know they're being toyed with, and when there is some tension. Unlike those quick off-screen kills or whatever, like those are fine. But when he's playing kind of a cat and mouse game, I think that's when some of the funnest moments can be found in these films.
And then I think that like around that time was also when the biker who'd been knocked out in the barn jumps out and attacks him, and just proving how badass they are, last all of 3 seconds against Jason, when, Preppy Paul in the last movie fought him twice.
Yeah.
I think, too, if I remember correctly, like, Jason looked physically larger in this movie than in the prior movie.
Yes,
taller.
Yeah, lumbering through that shed, he seemed like more of a more of a monster, and that kind of started building up as a more of a character here, I think, instead of just like a normal guy. Because part two, his hands, he just seemed like a normal person, which he was supposed to be, but they started building the character, making him larger, wearing the hockey mask, kind of more into the modern day Jason that everybody knows, the pre-zombified Jason before he was electrocuted and brought back to life.
Yeah, and then this movie ends with him getting an axe to the head, I believe, and him just laying in the
because then it cracks the mask. Yeah, and also too, this has Derek brought up. We were talking about this earlier. The body being thrown through the window. This is another one of those great scenes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's so many of those.
Which is my favorite in this. I love bodies being thrown through windows in these movies. Can never get tired of that. I want to see a movie where almost every kill is a body getting thrown through the window at somebody.
Maybe we should do a video where we show just how easy and or hard it is to throw a body through a window.
Yeah, what's the Mythbusters? We can do all horror Mythbusters.
Well, I guess it's good that they're throwing these people through cabins, because if you went to modern homes that have like double and triple pane glass, you would just throw the body against it and it would just plop out in the ground, and there's a smudge.
Or just go through one little section and, a head be through it or an arm or something.
So moving on, we're going to be talking about the final chapter, which didn't end up being quite so final. But this is one of the more well-regarded movies of the first four, at least box office-wise and critically looking back at him now. And it also introduced Corey Feldman as a main character and had him be Tommy, who was one of the only characters that recurred in multiple movies.
Yeah, I like the Tommy Jarvis storyline. Well, what they try to do with it. I thought it was interesting that they at least attempted to have an overall story arc, which it gave a little bit more weight to the series instead of feeling like it was a complete reset every time, which I think was smart,
Yeah, and this was another movie where it introduced a star to be, with Crispin Glover being in the movie.
Yes, his dance scene is, again, one of my favorite scenes in those first four movies.
And this one has some pretty decent kills. And introduce it. So the first one and the second one were at the camp, were counselors. The third one was more of people who weren't camp counselors just being around a camp area. And then this one is another one where it's just people hanging out at cabins or a house that is next door to the house where Tommy and his sister are. So they're kind of separate from that plot, but get pulled into it. So you get to see the annoying characters at the party get taken out.
And that's another point that kind of differentiates it from the first three movies, where it feels like there's more to it than just a group of counselors. There's these two different, there's the family, and then there's also kind of the partying kids and stuff.
Yeah, because all these movies and the death scenes almost kind of run together. I'm pretty sure this is the one where the guy's doing the handstand, he gets cut in half, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because I always remember that being one of the more iconic kills, too, because I always remember I think once he gets cut in half, Jason stuffs him up in the top of a bunk bed or something.
Yeah, because like we said, with some of these movies, like I watched all these in the past week and a half, and they do kind of run together. Especially since at the beginning of each movie they recap the prior one, and then like I said, like they sometimes change things or portray them differently.
Yeah. Well, they were doing, they did the first one was released in 1980, the second one 81, the third one 82, and then this one in 84. So the writers were just kind of, which it was different writers every time, different directors. Steve Miner came back for 2 and 3, but there was just kind of no overall vision for this. It was after every movie they decided, okay, well, let's make another one, and it's got to be released in about a year.
Yeah, and then this one took a little bit of an interesting twist, having one of the main characters be a kid, because you didn't know if they would actually pull the trigger and have Jason kill a kid. To that point, they hadn't, so it was still up in the air whether or not they would. Like I said, and then there's the Crispin Glover and his nerdy buddy have, I forgot what exactly the term was, like a computer that determines what their sexual
Prowess
is. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it,
Yeah.
I think it declared Crispin Glover as a dead fuck, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's what it was.
So
Which he did not like the results of.
So then after he beds the girl who his buddy was interested in, he comes back down to make sure he's aware of it.
Yeah, and he asked I think you asked her too, right?
Yeah.
After she gives him, her opinion.
Yeah, and then kind of going back to what you talked about earlier with, the adult film background of Cunningham before he made the first one.
Mm-hmm.
And this one, they have an old, 40s or 50s style film that they find with the projector, and they're watching it.
Yeah, and also the cinematographer on this was a cinematographer for Deep Throat.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it was very tame considering the things he had worked on, which he goes by a few different names. One of them is, of course, for his work in porn is different. In this, I believe he's Joel Fernandez, I think is what he goes by in this film.
Yeah, so this one, like we said, it has more interesting kills. They stopped for the most part doing the fade to white for any of the kills and showing more stuff. Because it's a few years later, the budgets are a little bit bigger than they were for the first few movies. And this
one aged pretty well, I feel like. This is my favorite one, I think, of those first four. I like two well enough, but this is probably my first favorite one.
Well, with the first two, more so than any of them, they still felt very much like they were in the 70s, even though they're all set in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
It was just the beginning of that decade, so it still very much had that 70s feel to it. The way the characters dressed and acted.
Yeah.
Over the course of the third one, kind of changed a little bit where it felt more like the 80s. But I think that was the first one that got out of that almost 70s mindset.
Yeah. Yeah, just the presentation of this one, and just everything about it. Again, it feels I don't want to say timeless at all, but slightly more timeless than all of the other films. Yeah. It's easier to go back and watch this one, I think, than any of the other ones. The pacing, just everything.
And compared to the last movie, this one has some more characters that you can identify with a little bit more as the audience. Mm-hmm. With Tommy and his sister, and then the guy that his sister runs into that is looking into the death of his sister, who was one of Jason's prior victims.
Yeah,
and that's a guy who
he was a decent guy too. He wasn't an annoying character or anything like that.
Yeah, he wasn't out in the prowl for poontang. He was trying to look into the disappearance or death of his sister. And he fights Jason, too, in the basement of their house. And I believe that he dies, or it's off screen. You never really see what happened to him.
Oh, yes. This is did she catch him on fire at all, Jason? Or that's that's running together with part 7, I think, telekinesis one.
Yeah.
All these films run together so easily.
Yeah, this is just the one where they're in the house and they fight in the basement. And I think the sister goes over to where her brother is. And then Jason comes in the house, and the kid Tommy, being into horror movies because he has puppets that are animatronic and stuff. He
very, very talented kid.
Yeah. He cuts his hair so he looks like Jason a little bit so that he can disorient him while his sister attacks him.
Which is such a weird plan for him to be shaving his head while his sister is being attacked by Jason. Isn't that essentially what's happening? Jason's running through his house while he's shaving his head.
Yeah, and that's his plan too, is to just look like Jason. I guess there's no way that he would know.
Well, they found a picture of him. Is what happens. He finds a picture of Jason.
But the kid. Psychological warfare with Jason Voorhees, and it somehow works, and then he chops him up.
Well, at the end of the second one, the girl Jenny puts on the mom's sweater to disorient for a minute, and but there's no way that anybody else would know that happened unless she told everybody, which there's no way. I don't know. It's just he just assumes it'll disorient him if he looks like him as a kid.
Jason has definite mommy issues.
And not to go off track, because I just remembered this. So apparently at the end of part 2, where the mom's head is on the pedestal in the shed, like, I think there was an original cut of it that had the head wink before the end of the movie.
Well, yeah, 'cause they do such a long, drawn-out cut.
I know.
You almost expect it.
Yeah. I remember waiting for that.
And then,
That's absolutely right.
because that's what I thought was going to happen as a kid, and it didn't. But apparently it's because they showed it, and they thought it just killed all tension or momentum they built up to that point with it being scary.
Mm-hmm.
But back to the movie we're talking about. And out of all the movies, like going back to the first one, what Derek mentioned about the main girl Alice fighting Pamela Voorhees, like she had like 3 or 4 different times where she had knocked her unconscious or knocked her down and just ran away. Well, Tommy don't play that. He he stabs Jason in the head with a machete, and then he sees his fingers twitching, and he goes to town just like tearing his face up and just destroying him.
And you can tell he's kind of enjoying it. And I think that was the plan, to have Tommy Jarvis eventually, well, not at the time really, but eventually have Tommy Jarvis become Jason.
Yeah. Yeah, because that, at the end of the movie, doesn't his sister go to see him and he has like a deranged look on his face when he's looking at the camera?
Yeah, which I like. I love that. But this was kind of the end of the era for the classic Jason, because after this, he's dead. He's in a grave. And part 5, he's nowhere to be found aside from kind of a dream somebody has. Right? Doesn't Tommy Jarvis have a dream of somebody waking him up? And then in 6 that actually happens. Well, they actually go to his gravesite, and then he gets electrocuted.
Yeah, 6 is where he goes to make sure that Jason's still in his grave, and he is. And then he stabs him with like the post, the fence post, and then he gets electrocuted and brings him back. So
yeah, like a universal monster. Yeah, so this is kind of the end of an era as far as the somewhat more realistic Jason, even though there's still not much logic given to these first 4 films.
But I just think the movies as a whole are better or more enjoyable when Jason's actually somewhat vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it more, almost like you said, it gives it more tension and makes it a little more suspenseful when you know that you can take him out, but he can still kind of.
Yeah.
When you get to that superhuman, it to me it kind of loses the feel it had of the first ones.
Yeah, me too. It definitely loses some tension after numerous sequels where he's just unstoppable. No matter what happens to him, he's probably going to get brought back, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do with the new TV series. And I guess this new is going to be a sequel to the remake, or I don't know what, but it's going to be interesting to see what take they have on Jason for those. Hopefully, it's more of a realistic one, which they did for the remake.
Yeah, because
as long as there's people getting hit in the vagina with the butts of guns, frying pans to the head, I'll be happy with it.
Because I even did an article a while back what they should do with Friday the 13th. And it's kind of hard, because if you do anything new and you try to reinvent anything, people are going to be mad.
Mm-hmm.
Because the last movie that really tried that was Jason X, where they put him in space. And if you just stick to kind of being like a straight up remake that sticks very close to the source material, you get the 2009 remake that did well enough. You would think they would eventually make a sequel, but nothing's happened with it yet. So whatever you do, people are going to be mad, but they do want something to happen with it.
Yeah. Well, and the new show, which is, CW, it's interesting that there might be like 2 killers, like a realistic killer, and then a Jason Voorhees, which that could mix it up. That could be interesting if they do something like that. Or, it's almost cliche now to go kind of meta with things. They've been doing it for a long time now. Even before Scream, Wes Craven's New Nightmare and everything like that. So I don't know if that's the direction either to go, is to be very self-aware of the series and make a film like that, or if you play it too straight and it's too much like the originals, it's just going to be another Friday the 13th movie where the same thing's happening again.
Yeah, and the conclusion I came to is we can just wait till whatever happens and then complain about it, because...
Yeah, that's what'll happen. And two, I don't know why they're treating this like it's such a big decision, because they can make a movie. If it's not any good, audiences will still come back because there's been so many bad ones already. You know, I know people have their favorites and some people love it. None of the films have been that phenomenal as far as critical reception goes, so they don't really have much to lose. I don't know why they're taking so long to kind of decide on what to do with it, because whatever happens, they can just reset or make another one. Audiences are used to that now, you know?
And another thing, too, with the Friday the 13th films over films like Halloween, you don't really have to give it much of a story. You could just come in and just, you know, worst case scenario, just have a ridiculous gore fest. Yeah. And if they did that, your gore, you know, most people would still at least appreciate that if it's just over the top ridiculous kills.
They could get a few weekends, you know, a theater full of audience members for a few weekends and probably make their money back pretty easily on that, and just see what people react to, you know?
Yeah, so we just have to kind of wait to see what's going to happen. It'll be interesting to see what they choose to do, if anything, or if they just keep pushing it off. But that wraps up our discussion of the Friday the 13th parts 1 through 4. So before we get to the end, does anybody have anything else they want to bring up?
Yeah, just anybody, if you have any comments about the whole series in general, or specifically 1 through 4, you can leave a comment on our page. We'll probably put this up on YouTube now, so we can have some discussion there on that. And, you know, you can also find this on iTunes or various other outlets as far as our site goes, and on YouTube.
And make sure, if you want to see anything that's new coming up, you go to housebythevideostore.com. You can look us up on Facebook at House by the Video Store. On Twitter, we're HBTVS_official, or you can just search for House by the Video Store there as well, just to see everything we got going on. We're also on Instagram, Vine, Reddit, Vimeo. We don't have Snapchat yet. We may do that at some point.
Yeah, it's hard for just a small staff to keep up with all these things when we, you and I, as far as William and I do the editing and also produce content as well. So it's kind of hard when you spend a whole week editing and then you're also trying to update all the social media sites as well as live your own life.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's why sometimes you see weeks where there's only a couple posts go out, just because we get everybody on the site. So the 3 people who write or produce any content, so myself, Sean, and Corey, we all work full-time jobs that aren't related to the website. So this is all just a, you know, labor of passion that we work on whenever we have time. And we hope to eventually bring some more people in to get some more writing done and to get more content out there. But we're very much still in the early stages of the site, so...
Yeah, and if you've only listened to the podcast or been on our YouTube page or subscribed to that or anything, the site also has, as William mentioned, some written content, some news, some trailer posts too. So it does have some different things. So, but if you're on our Facebook page and Twitter, for the most part, you can kind of keep up with everything that's happening on the site.
Yep, so... unless there's anything else, I think that wraps up this week's episode. So you can always just keep up with this at housebythevideostore.com. Thanks for listening.